In 2013, we've seen a number of very high-profile voyages recorded in the press, all using the new Arctic routes. And these have been heralded as being the start of brand new viable trade routes to particularly the Far East from Europe. Whereas the actual reality is somewhat less than has been put forward. If we look at the three routes on offer, the one over the pole itself is the most unlikely, certainly in the short to medium term, as this will require the most pessimistic or optimistic, depending on your view, pronouncements of the climate change scientists to be passable in any respect. Of the other two routes, the Northwest Passage is probably the least likely to be exploited commercially, leaving the Northern Sea route as the most likely one, and also the one with the most developed infrastructure. That's not to say that the infrastructure is extensive, but it is at least in place. If we look at the Northern Sea route, you'll see that it actually covers four distinct sea areas. From west to east, these are the Barents Sea, which is already well economically exploited, particularly for fishing and increasingly in the oil, gas and other mineral exploitations. So this is already a developed sea. We then get into the middle seas, so the Kara Sea and the Laptev Sea, linked by the Strait of Vilkitsky, which is actually the most northerly part of the sea route, and also the most isolated from civilization. And finally we get through the Siberian Sea, linking up with the Bering Straits between Russia and Alaska. The total length of this passage is some 3,200 nautical miles. And while it does offer a distinct saving over the alternative passage through the Middle East from the Far East to Europe, it is by no means an open or easy sea to negotiate. If we actually look at the most northerly point in the Strait of Vilkitsky, at this point we are some 660 or so nautical miles from the pole. It is as far north of the Arctic Circle as the Arctic Circle is itself north of, say, somewhere like Norway, Oslo in Norway. So it's a long way north and extremely cold. If we look at the Russian Northern Sea Route Administration's requirements to pass through this in the permissions they issue to the vessels, we'll see that this middle passage through these straits usually has the most stringent requirements, particularly in regards to the carriage of ice pilots and also the requirements to take an icebreaker assistance in medium to heavy ice in particular. When we're talking about an ice-free passage, it's well worth remembering this does not mean there will be a complete absence of ice. What it means is that it's an absence of continuous sheet ice. And so even in areas which are supposedly ice-free, the vessels themselves will still be required to be strengthened, equipped and operated with people experienced in these sort of conditions. If we look at the icebreakers that are required to conduct the passages through the middle two seas, there are only around about 4 or 5 of these vessels available at any one time in this whole area. This means that the capacity for transferring ships through this is comparatively limited, and also the search and rescue capabilities are extremely limited, bearing in mind that there are no communities in the major communities in this area. There are only 3 designated search and rescue coordination centres in the passage, and none of these has any very great infrastructure. I think only one of them actually has helicopters, for example, and the only other source of aircraft would be fixed-wing aircraft from areas like Murmansk or Archangelsk. So you're very much forced back on the search and rescue capabilities of the icebreakers. And to illustrate, recently a Russian tanker, a small Russian product tanker, was holed in the Arctic region. Although the holding was not serious, the vessel was not in concert with any other vessels operating independently in supposedly relatively ice-free areas. It took 5 days before an icebreaker was able to get to the vessel, and another 3 days before a suitable tanker was available to offload her cargo. And so you can see just how slow response can be, purely because of the vast distances involved and the comparatively undeveloped state of the infrastructure. If we look at other aspects of the navigation of this area, we have to remember that in these northern latitudes, the actual current window for operations is really only from mid-June until October. Obviously, people hope that this may be extended with global warming, but it is only a 3-month period at present. And we also have to remember that in the most northern parts of this area, there are 3 months of the year, for example, where there is no daylight at all, and so it can be an extremely inhospitable and cold area. And as a result, there are knock-ons to the costs involved. We already mentioned the requirement to have trained personnel. The vessel must be found suitable for operation in ice, and you also need the vessels to be ice strengthened for those periods, not only when they are operating in deep ice, but also when they're operating independent of icebreakers. So all in all, there are a lot of attendant costs, and that doesn't even include the costs of insurance, which is an area which I believe is currently under intense discussion amongst the insurance community as to what exactly rates you would have to impose in these areas for regular passengers. Is this a commercially viable route for the present? I don't think so. I think that the situation is that the relatively undeveloped nature of the area and also the commercial, political and material hazards of the area mean that there will need to be a lot more development before it can be considered as a commercial reality. If anything is going to spur the development of these things, it's more likely to be the development of oil, gas or other resources of the Arctic rather than commercial shipping.